Hey guys, I'm Ben. Welcome back to another episode. Sorry I haven't posted for a while, but things have been pretty crazy here in my neck of the woods. But that being said, let's just get into it, shall we? Lately I've been thinking about some of those one and done bands, especially in the case from primarily death metal that managed to leave us something very special in their short tenures as bands. Of course, there's many examples that we could look at. But I want to look at 10 bands that released only one full-length album before calling it quits completely, or just, never getting around again to write another album. Some of the bands I'm going to mention do have some demos and EPs that are notable, but today's criteria is specifically bands who only ever made one album. And of course, an album I think that is something special and worth talking about and worth keeping alive, hopefully. So let's get into it. I will say that these aren't ranked in any order at all. These are just 10 albums that I really love and want to share with you guys. So number one, the first album I want to talk about is a band hailing from Austria, and that is the mighty Miasma with 1992's Changes. The thing I love about this amazing album that it seamlessly moves from one frenetic thrash-like attack of the opener Baphomet to the doom-drenched, almost gothic feel of the epic Schizophrenia. This is a sort of recurring theme throughout the album. That's not to say that those feels are segregated from each other either, with most of the tracks exploring different tempos and modes, yet retaining the driving and pulverizing 90s death metal character many of us know and love. There are moments of acoustic guitar and church organs sprinkled in, but overall this is an adventurous assault on the senses that is both epic in its scope, filled with interesting and even unusual riffs, yet still is raw and mean and even rudimentary at times, just the way death metal should be. I can't recommend this album highly enough. Next, in number two, we have one of the bands that came out of the fertile first wave of Swedish death metal in the early 90s. A band that almost never gets talked about, and in my opinion, it really rivals any of the big names from that scene. I'm talking about the band Uncanny and their strangely titled 1994 album Splenium for Nyktophobia. Dealing with themes ranging from death and war to fantasy, and shrouded in the familiar tones of the Boss HM2 distortion pedal that was really the staple of the Swedish bands in that scene, Uncanny delivered up a collection of songs that are utterly death metal perfection. While on the surface there seem to be the familiar tropes of that Swedish scene, but on deeper analysis we find a band that is extremely adventurous with their riff writing, very clever and precise with their execution, and most importantly, eminently catchy. That's the thing that rings true about this album for me. Even though the band does not skimp on the brutality or aggression, they still are able to create songs that are memorable, grooving, and interesting while, caving your fucking skull in. An absolutely pulverizing and excellent album, and it might even be my favorite from that whole scene. At least it's up there with Like an Ever-Flowing Stream and Left Hand Path and all those classics. Check out tracks like the opener Elohim and Brain Excess to get a taste of what this one is all about. Highly, highly recommended for fans of those Swedish bands. Okay, next we have another obscure favorite of mine that I only discovered myself in recent times, thanks to a recommendation from a friend. I'm talking about a German band called Immortalis and their absolutely killer 1991 album Indicium de Mortuis. Immortalis is one of those bands that really highlights the diversity that first and second wave death metal could offer. Everything from dismember-like riffs and tones to strange, unhinged, screamed and yelled vocals to melodic choral sections that seem to perfectly evoke the mood of demons emerging from the murky underworld to conquer the earth. Combine that with the interludes that sound like they're sort of straight from 70s or 80s horror movie soundtracks, and you have some idea of what to expect from this fantastic album. It's all put together with almost progressive tendencies and yet remains utterly pummeling and ferocious, merciless and unabashedly death metal. The playing is rock solid and the aggression oozes out of every second. This album has quickly become a favorite of mine and a go-to on a regular basis for, its ability to scratch both my permanent itch for pulverizing death metal, but also my itch to make it slightly unusual and interesting. Check out the opening track, Burning Existence, and the killer Quo Vadis to get an idea of the journey that awaits within. Highly recommended for those who like their metal pulverizing, yet raw, but also with a taste of something slightly unusual. Next, we have one of the more well-known albums on this list, but I still feel that it doesn't get the attention it deserves relative to the scene it came from. I'm talking about the Florida-based badasses Disincarnate and their masterpiece of death metal from 1993, Dreams of the Carrion Kind. So many of you know, and many others may not, Disincarnate is the brainchild of the legendary guitar maestro James Murphy, who famously added his extremely glorious leads and writing to some of the absolute classics of the genre. Everything from Death's Spiritual Healing to Obituary's Cause of Death to the also underrated but fantastic Death Shall Rise by British legends Cancer. He also has released several great and musically varied solo albums and has appeared on countless other bands' albums as well. He's easily one of my all-time favorite death metal shredders, and after helping all those other legends lift into the stratosphere, he decided to create his own band. Disincarnate can be looked at as a James Murphy solo album, but the rest of the band is also on fire, with stellar drumming, being the other standout besides the absolute guitar fireworks. On this album, James was able to craft technically ambitious songs that were, an early precursor perhaps for the tech death genre, but while also retaining the brutality and savagery of pure death metal. Again, the recurring theme with many of the albums we're discussing today is that they are all full of memorable and catchy death metal, and Dreams of the Carrion Kind is no different, which, considering the technicality and brutality I mentioned, is no mean feat. Many other shredders in the genre fail to come close to James's ability to be both technically explosive while also writing great songs. Any fans of the classic era Florida death metal scene of the late 80s and early 90s will likely already know and love this album as I do. But if you missed it and love those classics from that scene, then don't sleep on this absolute banger of an album. Check out the songs Stench of Paradise Burning and Soul Erosion for a taste of this album's glory. It's an all-time favorite of mine, and I really can't recommend this one highly enough. Go check it out. Next, we're heading back to Sweden to pick up another amazing album that seems to be criminally overlooked when discussing this scene. This short, sharp shock of pure Swedish excellence is God Macabre, got a shirt, and 1991's The Winterlong. So this has to be the shortest album on the list, clocking in around 28 minutes, but damn, what a killer 28 minutes it is. Again, the familiar tonal tropes are there on the surface. At a quick glance, it's just another Swedish death metal album, but again, on closer inspection, the quality of the songwriting is immediately felt. There is a focused conservation of time and energy and an immediacy here. The band really wastes no time delivering up riff after memorable riff, tight and exact performances, and once again, just damn good, memorable songs. They aren't really reinventing the wheel here, but they just knew how to write killer song after killer song, and I think they have some of the strongest and most memorable songwriting from that early Swedish scene, giving us enough melody to make it interesting, but not so much as to steal from the overall attack, raw power, and drive. One difference is they do mix in some doominess into the attack, but like early Asphyx albums, it's not enough to make it boring. Also, the doomier sections are usually when the melody is taking the forefront, and the melodies are, simple, catchy, and excellent. Songs like Teardrops highlight this element, while songs like Opener, Into Nowhere, and Ashes of Morning Life highlight the more traditional Swedish thrashy onslaught. I absolutely love this album. I wish this band had done more, but this short slab of forward-thinking death metal is pure perfection. Highly recommended for the Swedish death metal lovers who missed this one. So when I started thinking about this list, I didn't realize that there would be so many Swedish bands, but here we go. I have another one for you. I'm talking about Excruciate with 1993's Passage of Life.
Shadows of death and lost territory. Observe Memorables Tony awake Anatomical Alteration
Excruciate doesn't really fit the typical Swedish tonal mode like some of the other bands I've mentioned. In fact, I usually forget they are Swedes for some reason. I usually think of them as Dutch. I think it's also because they seem to mix the classic rudimentary death metal riffing with more typically eccentric riffing style that so many of the great Dutch bands employ. The thing I love about this album is that they seem to conjure up these strange moods with this very unique lead line guitar tone. It's actually not that often that they use it either, but when they do, it's instantly noticeable. And, there's something really eerie and haunting and almost human about that really resonates with me. Of course, as I mentioned, the riffing is great as well, and the band performances are rock solid. Although I will say that there is a slight looseness that is, that's really common in the death metal demos of that time, and I really love that about this album, that it has that as well. The dark, loose, raw, and murkiness that just gives the metal from that era so much character and charm, and this album oozes it all over the place. Besides the great riffs and cool lead lines, that we also get the odd random keyboard hit that almost sort of sounds like someone just accidentally leaned on a keyboard in the studio while they were tracking the guitars, and they said, "Hey, that's cool. Let's leave it in." But again, I love that eccentricity. It all adds up to create a fantastic listen. Check out Endless Suffering, Confused Mind, and Anatomical Self-Fertilization to get an idea of what this album is all about. A perhaps more rudimentary album than some of the others on the list, but just damn good, catchy, raw, and cool death metal. Go check it out. Next, we're heading back to the States and jumping a few years forward and also into the more brutal death metal and gore grind world with Regurgitation and 1999's Tales of Necrophilia. So this one I've noticed has been getting a resurgence in recent years, especially since J-Dog from Hell's Headbangers has been giving them props on his channel in recent times, which is awesome. I hope this means we get more from them. Anyway, whenever I listen to these guys, they always feel like the logical extension of the Barnes era Cannibal Corpse. It's that kind of brutality and straightforward, bloodthirsty approach and bludgeoning, but with enough of their own unique flavor thrown in to make them stand out. I love how sinister and unhinged their riffs sound, and when the leads kick in, even though they lift it melodically, they also seem to have that maniacal, unhinged presence to them that really adds something so cool to the overall sound. The vocals, of course, are low and gurgling and fit perfectly. I find that I can often get bored with similar bands doing this style, but Regurgitation absolutely nails the fuck out of it here. And once again, it just comes down to being able to write cool, standout songs. Check out Seed of Sanguinary, always fuck that up, and Repulsive Genital Disfigurement to get a taste of their brand of nastiness. Highly recommended for those who like it brutal and gore-filled, but with a little twist of melody to give it some character. Next, we have another American band, and this time we're leaning slightly more into the death doom world, which I'm not usually that crazy about. But one of the few exceptions that I want to mention today are Accidental Suicide with their 1992 album, Deceased. remember first hearing this and getting a strong, disastrous murmur vibe, perhaps because of the production, which isn't great, but like Rhapsodies in Red, it lends the album that raw charm I mentioned earlier, and which I love on both albums. The quirky and unique riffing here also invoked the aforementioned Austrians, but where Disastrous Murmur has a more rampaging and grooving attack, Accidental Suicide is more disjointed, sporadic, and angular, and decidedly more weird, and that's precisely what I love about it. At one moment, you can have the rampaging Morbid Angel style riffing of a song like Agony of Rebirth, but then it's contrasted with the sort of disembodied doominess of a song like Unknown. The highlight for me, I think, might be the song The Life I Hate, which showcases all their powers, I should say, but really the whole album is a journey into the weird and wonderful, and I highly recommend it if you don't mind your death metal a bit doomy, but also somewhat unhinged and uniquely weird in the best kind of ways. Number 9, next we have an American band, the thrashy, rampaging Death Strike, and their aptly titled 1991 album, Fucking Death!
Open your eyes, clear fucking mind, remove that disguise, deep in your mind, buzzing fire, unclear mind, buzzing fire, silent crime.
So Death Strike was another project from the mighty Paul Speckman, who is more well known for his other band, Master. And I fucking love Master. And this album sees Paul at his monstrous bellowing best. You know, I love his vocals from these early years. The early Master albums are some of my favorites. And while I don't rate this quite on the same level as, say, Master's unreleased 1985 album or On the Seventh Day God Created Master, I still think this is a charging beast of an album. This thing pummels forward like the Hulk getting pissed off in the pit. It's raw, and the energy and anger, and it's just fucking brimming with punky piss and vinegar and a real I don't give a fuck attitude. There's nothing revolutionary here per se, but you know, if you like your death metal thrashy and rampaging with speed and anger, then this shit is for you. Songs like The Truth, Re-Entry, and Destruction highlight this perfectly, but songs like The Final Countdown do offer a slight reprieve and change of pace. But for the most part, this is in full attack mode the rest of the time. Highly recommended for fans of early Master and death thrash in general. Okay, number 10. Finally, we arrive at the last band for today, and it's probably maybe the most well-known band on the list, but when it comes to one-and-done bands, they definitely need to be included. Hailing from the US, I'm talking about Ripping Corpse and 1991's Dreaming with the Dead. band's main claim to fame is that it was the band Eric Rutan was playing guitar in before he joined Morbid Angel, and later, of course, to form Hate Eternal, as well as produce and eventually join Cannibal Corpse, making him pretty much a household name in the death metal world. But Ripping Corpse are much more than just Eric's first well-known band. On Dreaming with the Dead, the band produced a death metal classic. They delivered a sound that was laced with interesting and catchy riffing, blistering and pulverizing attacks, blasting drums, vocals that kind of remind me of Malevolent Creation a little bit, and of course, Eric's killer lead guitar explosions, which just elevate everything to God tier status. The songs always go in interesting directions and aren't predictable like so many in the genre can be. Songs like the title track, Anti-God, Beyond Humanity, and Through the Skin to the Soul are as good a place to sample as any, as they show the band at their rampaging and exciting best. A band that doesn't need the same kind of exposure as many others on this list, as they're fairly well known and loved already, but they rule, and so I decided to include them here. Highly recommended for all fans of classic and old school 90s death metal, and if you missed them, definitely go check it out. You know, when I was thinking about this subject, I wrote down many other bands, so I might do a part 2 of this because there's plenty more great one and dones out there that need some love and attention too. Anyway, guys, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Stay metal, and see you next time.